Hello friends, and happy Halloween! Draw the curtains and turn off the lights because today we're going to be talking about some more dark Nancy Drew fan theories. Whereas my last video on this topic leaned more towards the fun, spooky theories, the ones I'm going to be talking about today are more grim and disturbing. Content warnings for incest, suicide, homophobia. While I won't be talking about any of these topics in great detail, they will all be mentioned as significant parts of these theories. Further disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers for Ghost of Thornton Hall, Shadow at the Water's Edge, Sea of Darkness, The Captive Curse. Theory number 1, Clara Thornton's father. Let's start off with the most well-known Nancy Drew fan theory, just to get it out of the way. If you are an active member of the Clue crew, you probably already know that I'm talking about the Ghost of Thornton Hall incest theory. Yeah, at the heart of Ghost of Thornton Hall is the Thornton family, a decaying, once prosperous clan who return to the old family estate when the youngest member, Jessalyn, goes missing. Even the dead members of the family have a tangible presence in this game, with reminders of them everywhere you look, whether it be the cemetery, the scribbled family tree in Jessalyn's backpack, or the many old portraits which line the halls. The dubious heritage of Jessalyn's mother, Clara, is the focus of this particular fan theory. Before I go any further, I should say that Ghost of Thornton Hall is heavily inspired by Southern Gothic, a genre most well known in literature. One of the best, most concise definitions of Southern Gothic comes from Wikipedia. Southern Gothic literature set out to expose the myth of old antebellum South, and its narrative of an idyllic past hidden by social, familial, and racial denials and suppressions. Thornton Hall just seeps with the Gothic from your very first glimpse of Black Rock Island. It's always nighttime and foggy, and everything on the estate is old and decaying, which, of course, feels like a metaphor for the decline of the Thornton family itself. Did I mention I have an English degree? There's a reason Thornton Hall is one of my favorite Nancy Drew games. And what could be more Gothic than ghosts?
What was that?
It's easy to see how the game fits into the Gothic genre, but how does it tie into the more specific quantifier of Southern Gothic, other than the fact that it's set in the American South? If you read about Southern Gothic literature, you might notice a few recurring tropes, many of which also crop up in Ghost of Thornton Hall. There's the theme of isolation, exemplified by Thornton Hall's location on an island and the family's distance from one another, both physically and emotionally. A sense of the past haunting the present, which is clear in the game's narrative, hung up on the death of Charlotte so many years ago. Eccentric or outsider characters represented in the game by Harper Thornton, and the very heart of this story is about a dysfunctional family and their buried secrets, or familial suppressions, to use Wikipedia's wording. Another of the cornerstones of the Southern Gothic genre is, how do I say this? Deviant sexual desires. For example, necrophilia in William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, or fornication with watermelons in Suttree by Cormac McCarthy. No, I'm not making that up. Southern Gothic, as a genre, is up. So how does a game based on a conservative children's book series fit into this Southern Gothic trope? Well, incest. This theory suggests that Clara's father is also her grandfather. On Jessalyn's copy of her family tree, which reaches as far back as her great-great-great-great-grandfather, Jeb, the only name that's missing is that of Jessalyn's own maternal grandfather. Wade tells Nancy that Rosalie, Clara's mother, always refused to tell her who her father was, even when she was on her deathbed and Clara was at risk of being orphaned.
That there is Clara's mother.
What can you tell me about her?
Not a great deal. She loved her secrets. Never even told Clara who her daddy was.
Why not?
Don't know. When Clara was about 10, Rosalie got real sick. Every day Clara would ask about her daddy. I think she was afraid of being left to fend for herself, but Rosalie wouldn't say.
Incest would be a very good reason to not reveal Clara's true father. Furthermore, this theory provides an alternate motive for why Clara set the fire which accidentally killed Charlotte. In the cellar, you can find a note which reveals that Charlotte had a cryptic obsession with Jackson. This note also suggests that Jackson had something to hide. What if Charlotte discovered the truth of Clara's parentage, and Clara started the fire not to suppress the contents of Charlotte's will, but to destroy the evidence of her lineage? This theory was fueled when someone from Her Interactive was asked in an interview about Clara's father and answered like this: Ghost of Thornton Hall is a very dark story, but we are a company that designs for ages 10 and up. Our goal in this particular game was to design a game that would engage the younger players, but really scare the older players. Naturally, this comment seemed to suggest that there is more to Clara's parentage than meets the eye, and to grasp the really scary stuff, the terrors more real than ghosts, one would have to read between the lines, so to speak. Her later shut down this theory and stated that it hadn't been their intention when creating the game, but that didn't stop fans from speculating, and this still remains the most frequently discussed Nancy Drew game theory. Theory number 2, the tragedy of Kasumi. This is another incredibly popular theory in the fandom, so much so that many people regard it as canon. Much like Ghost of Thornton Hall, Shadow at the Water's Edge is about a family suffering from the loss of someone that they didn't realize was the glue that was holding them all together. In Shadow at the Water's Edge, this person is Kasumi, a figure who metaphorically and somewhat literally haunts those she left behind. And also Nancy. Kasumi's death is presented to the player as an accident. She slipped in the bath, hit her head, and drowned. But there's enough evidence in the game to cast doubt on this cause and to spawn this theory among fans. The speculation is that Kasumi's death wasn't an accident, but suicide. In the infamous article Nancy Gets Logan to Translate, it is mentioned that the police suspect foul play. This would indicate that Kasumi's death didn't at first appear to be an accident, and was more suggestive of an intention behind her death. Then there's the scavenger hunt Kasumi prepared for her daughters soon before her passing, a scavenger hunt that culminates in the bath where she later died. The trail's end being located in the bath could just be morbid coincidence, or evidence that Kasumi planned her death down to its very location. The letter that Kasumi intended her daughters to find even mentions that she knew she wasn't long for this world. Again, this could just be an eerie sense of intuition, or it could mean something more. Kasumi also encourages Yumi and Miwako to be free and seek out their own happiness, something that she regretted being unable to do in her own life. The letter feels like a plea to her daughters to prevent them from experiencing the unhappiness she felt. Kasumi had grown distant from her own sister, so much so that her sister didn't even attend Kasumi's funeral.
My youngest. She met some man from overseas. She never has visited. Says it's too far. Wants me to visit. She knows I can't leave here. She did not even come home for the funeral.
It's clear that she didn't want the same distance to grow between her daughters, and was trying to make things right in the limited time that she had. One gets the impression that Kasumi was a very lonely person. The only person she could talk about her feelings honestly with was a distant pen pal. On the very day she died, Kasumi was looking forward to meeting her pen pal, but Takai prevented her from going out. This incident feels like a representation of her whole life. Feeling trapped in the Ryokan, and being unable to leave due to family obligations. This might have been the cherry on top of Kasumi's unhappiness, the factor that plunged her so deep into despair that she wasn't able to find her way back out. Takai certainly seems to take it this way and blames herself for Kasumi's death. All of Kasumi's remaining family members, in fact, feel an intense guilt over her death. Their guilt would feel almost excessive if her death was an accident. It's plausible that they suspect her death to be a suicide as well.
It wasn't an accident. But since you won't let it drop, you want to know why we all blame ourselves, Nancy?
Why?
Because we were all here. We were all here that night, and not one of us helped her. We all just let her die alone.
I think the most convincing evidence towards this theory is a speech Takai gives.
When I was a girl, the most beautiful sparrow from the garden flew into my room. I had been trying to lure it in with seeds I'd stolen from the gardens for weeks. At first, I was so excited to have her in my room, but not for long. She couldn't find her way back out. She became very scared, threw herself into the walls in a panic. I was so worried she would die. She was so small and so frightened.
She compares Kasumi to a bird trapped inside a room, unable to see a way out. Although in theory she's describing Kasumi's spirit, I think that's a pretty good description of suicidal ideation. Despite this evidence, I'm not fully convinced by this theory. Do I think that Her Interactive, a creator of children's computer games, sat down and said, let's make a game about suicide for ages 10 and up? No, of course not. Theory number 3. Why does everyone hate Soren? In Sea of Darkness, Soren, the manager of the cultural center, is treated like an outsider by the small Icelandic town of Skiprot, even though he's lived there for 12 years. The canon reason for this is that he was raised in a town 10 miles away, a town that is, significantly, not Skiprot.
Oh, for the love of... I was born 10 miles away!
And that means you don't live here?
To him, yes. To everyone, yes. It's preposterous. In their minds, I'll never be from Skiprot because I wasn't born here. Upper secondary school was a nightmare with these people.
I may not know much about Skiprot, but there are lots of unpleasant people in my line of work. Sometimes persistence helps.
Oh, I've tried. I've bent over backwards to put on this festival for them, and yet no one invites me out. I'm not welcome at the pub.
In the eyes of the townspeople, Soren does not belong there. However, many Nancy Drew fans remain unconvinced by this explanation. Even for a small town, the amount of backlash Soren faces feels over-exaggerated considering how long he's lived there and how relatively close by he grew up. He's not exactly a tourist. A sadder and somewhat more plausible reason for the townfolk's animosity towards Soren is that he's gay and they're homophobic. Skiprot is a small traditional town, and small traditional towns are more likely to be prejudiced. At one point in the game, Elizabeth makes a comment in reference to Soren which feels very significant.
We are not like Reykjavik, like a big city.
This quote suggests that the residents of Skiprot are more close-minded and bigoted than those of larger, more tolerant cities like Reykjavik. To gain further insight into this theory, we have to look at Captain Lawrence, the historic captain of the Hirlakide. His story partially mirrors Soren's. The citizens of Skiprot once persecuted Captain Lawrence, much like they now persecute Soren. The Skiprotians eventually formed a mob, hunted down Captain Lawrence, and killed him. This incident gains further significance if you know that the writer of Sea of Darkness, Katie Chironis, stated on Twitter that Captain Lawrence was queer. This tweet has since been deleted, so I can't say what the exact wording was, but there are multiple references to it out there on the internet. Soren and Captain Lawrence are both viewed as outsiders by the people of Skiprot, despite having close ties to the town. Soren, of course, has lived there for over a decade and runs the culture center, and the captain married and had a baby with the daughter of the town's founding family. I don't think it's too much of a jump to suggest that their lives paralleled each other's even further, and that Soren is queer too. Fans have even suggested that homophobia was the real reason Captain Lawrence was persecuted. However, this is another fan theory that has been debunked by Her Interactive. A former employee made a post on Reddit listing different Nancy Drew characters who many staff consider to be LGBTQ+, but which, due to the conservative values of the CEO, Penny Milliken, they weren't able to officially confirm in the games. For example, this ex-employee stated that George, Sunny June, Moira Chisholm, and Xenia Dukas all fall into the LGBTQ+ spectrum. They also explicitly stated that Soren is asexual. Although gay and asexual are not mutually exclusive terms, I think we can assume that if Soren were gay, this ex-employee would have probably mentioned that too. Perhaps the people of Skiprot are asphobic, but I feel this is unlikely as being asexual would be a lot easier for Soren to keep to himself than being gay. But maybe Soren has it in his Tinder bio. I don't know. Theory number 4. Renata's story. This theory revolves around Renata, a professional storyteller who is visiting Castle Finster in the Captive Curse. Early on in the game, Renata tells Nancy a story about a little girl who ran into the woods and went missing.
Let me tell you a story a friend told me. She stayed here with her family a long time ago when she was a young girl. Back then the woods outside the castle walls were a very dangerous place, especially for a little girl. That's why her father told her she was never going to the woods alone. This little girl? She had a small red scarf that came all the way from India. It had a parade of gold-stitched elephants, all walking in a line. She was very proud of it, and how far it had traveled just to belong to her. One day when she was playing in the field, a gust of wind carried the scarf deep into the woods. When the girl's older sister saw her walk into the forest, she tried to stop her, but it was too late. She couldn't catch up. 2 girls went out into the woods. One came back.
It is only much later in the game, after Nancy retrieves the elephant scarf from the story, that Renata confesses that she was the little girl, and the other girl was her older sister.
That story you told me about the girls. That was you, wasn't it? You chased your sister into the woods, but couldn't save her.
You're half right.
How so?
I was the little girl. It was my older sister who chased me into the woods. My sister died trying to protect me.
Even when she tells Nancy a more complete version of the tale, Renata admits a lot of details, such as what really happened to her sister that night. She tells Nancy that the monster was responsible for her sister's fate, but as we know from the end of the game, the monster isn't real. Many fans view this as a similar situation to Ghost of Thornton Hall, where to discover the real truth behind the story, one needs to do a bit of detective work. Unlike Ghost of Thornton Hall, there isn't one general consensus as to what happened to Renata's sister, but the common agreement is that it was nothing good. The most interesting explanation for this that I've seen makes a connection to real historical events. We know Renata was alive during the Second World War, as another story she tells took place between the wars, which to me implies that it happened between World War I and World War II. I think we can conjecture that those were the 2 most important wars for Germany in recent history. Inkdagger on Reddit says, if I had to throw out a guess about what happened to Renata's sister specifically, well, it was World War II, or very shortly before or after. During World War II, just before and after, people went missing all the time. People either trying to escape or being stolen away to who knows where. I'm more inclined to believe the stolen away angle. Renata is a storyteller by trade, meaning that her main gift and power is language. She is master of the simile, the alliteration, the onomatopoeia. I think we can assume the monster in her story is metaphorical. This idea is even suggested by the way she talks about the monster. She basically says to Nancy that the real monster is man. I think that's the truth behind this story. Renata witnessed someone harm her sister that night, whether they abducted her or killed her. They were a human being, but they were also a monster.
It was bad times. Everyone was very scared and very used to fighting, sometimes killing.
Even without the additional speculation of this theory, Renata's story remains one of the darkest things in the Nancy Drew game franchise.
The worst monsters are self-made. There are people like you and like me, but they have taken a terrible turn. They let everything awful, everything sad take up all of the breathing room in their hearts, until all they know is revenge.
I don't necessarily endorse or believe any of these theories, but they're interesting to ponder nevertheless, and I think the evidence towards them is pretty well thought out. What about you? Do you believe any of these theories? Are there any dark Nancy Drew theories that I missed? Let me know in the comments. And remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos on theories about the Nancy Drew games.